Okay.
Welcome everybody to this edition of Beer with Bill. It's my great pleasure to welcome Mike McWilliam, Kickoff Alumnus, foosball champion, and a wind turbine specialist. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hi, Bill. How are you doing?
And oh, by the way, everybody, true to form, my 4 beers are sitting in Woodstock and we're in Toronto. So Mike and I are starting with a Henderson's Best Amber Ale. So you guys can start with the Pilsner if you got it. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yes.
So of course, Mike, what's on the mind of everybody who knows you? Do you play foosball in Copenhagen?
I'm afraid not. My life has changed quite a bit, I would say. Yeah. So I think back in the kickoff days, I spent almost every other night at kickoff having a beer with buddies. And now I have a 2-year-old son and a pretty busy job. And yeah, I don't get out much anymore. So no foosball. But, you know, different priorities in life now. So, and I love it. So go out to the playground, go out to the forest, watch him discover sticks and slugs and, you know, whatever else interests him. That's sort of what my life is about now. So.
So what beer do you drink in Copenhagen?
Yeah. So in Copenhagen, they have a thing called Julebrew. So right around Christmas, they have a special brew that's sort of spiced and extra strong. And that is my favorite beer. And when it comes around Christmas time, I actually buy way more Julebrew than you can drink in a Christmas. And I just keep it in the basement. And I don't drink Julebrew all year round, but it's kind of, yeah, it tastes good. I like it. So I don't think there's anything like it in Ontario, but like you'll have like Christmas spices in the beer basically. So it's like some kind of spiced beer. Yeah. And the one I like is the Tuborg one, which has like a licorice flavor to it. Yeah. So there you go.
No, when Jackie was over visiting you in the period of time before COVID.
Yeah.
Isn't it nice? We're going to refer to everything as BC before COVID. It was around her birthday in November and she went out and bought you a bunch of Christmas beers.
Yeah.
And that was her big thing. And the fact that she got them back to your apartment safely was really important.
Yeah, and they're all like all the breweries in Denmark basically do it. So it's like it's just, yeah, and it's usually something similar to the beer they have, but just more spicy. So
what's the craft beer scene like?
Yeah, so that's I was expecting Denmark to somehow have way more craft beer than Ontario. Maybe if I searched for it more, I would see it more, but it is about the same, maybe not as much. And I think there's a big difference between like the way they sell beer in Denmark. They're really relaxed about alcohol. So you can buy beer anywhere, kiosk, grocery store, whatever, right? And what ends up happening is all the grocery stores, all the kiosks, they end up just selling the same 10 beers. And so if you really want something that is sort of unique or different, then you sort of have to kind of go searching for it. And so I think like, so this is basically what I noticed, like in Canada, you always have to go to a beer store or a liquor store. And these liquor stores are trying to get as many people in the door as possible. And so they work at trying to make sure there is sort of these, you know, more interesting products to get people in the door. And so it's actually, I think it's a bit easier to find the microbreweries sort of in Canada. So I would say that like, yeah, so where I've found microbreweries is when I've gone traveling more. So I'd be traveling around Denmark, every small town, or I shouldn't say small town, but Denmark is really just a lot of islands. And so every island has their own brewery essentially. And then of course, you know, that would just be a stop to go to check out the brewery and have their brew. And the one brewery that I think is my favorite that I try to like, if I'm nearby, I'll go out of my way to get there. Arrow. is the island called Arrow, and the brewery is called Arrow, and the beer is I think it's walnut ale, and it's delicious. That's the one I like the best. But yeah.
Yes, Terry, we get that. In Alberta, you got to be able to buy it in all sorts of places, but the selection got decreased completely.
Yeah.
And that's stereotypic of anywhere where they expand the number of places where things are put out. Why would you stock anything more than the 10 that actually sell the most?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. So the kiosks are tiny. They only have so much fridge space. Yeah. So.
And you can drink beer anywhere.
So this part is cool about Copenhagen. Like in Canada, you have to be in this like gated little area to drink alcohol. Like you can go walking down the street drinking a beer. You can go to the park with your friends and have beer. You can go to the beach, have beer. And this part is really cool. And I think for the first 2 or 3 years in Denmark, I almost never went to a bar because it was just more fun just going to either a nice square in the city or a nice park in the city and just hanging out. They have like all sorts of games that you play in the park, like this Kongspiel, they call it, which is Danish for king's game. And it's, you just throw sticks at other sticks, trying to knock over sticks. And you have to knock over the sticks in a very specific order, and then you win. And it's a perfect, hang out with the friends kind of game. And so that's what you see when you're in Denmark at the parks, is people just sitting on beach blankets, drinking, having picnics, and then throwing sticks at each other.
I watch those teenagers throw sticks. They're more interested in drinking the beer. Please.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and so this is another thing about Denmark is they are way more relaxed about drinking than we are here. And it is also like, it is a country where they get drunk more often, and they get more drunk. It's kind of like so it is sort of one of these societies where people are very shy and very socially awkward, and there's a lot of like protocols when it comes to sort of social interaction. And so they're not so good. Like in Canada, like the first day I was here, we're just walking around in the morning and everyone's asking me how I'm doing, and I was like, what's going on? And then I was like, okay, wait a minute, this is Canada. But people don't talk to you unless they know you. They will not talk to you in Denmark. And it's like, the way I would describe it is, the way it was described to me is, if you see somebody sitting alone, and they look lonely and then whatever, in Canada, it would be rude not to ask them how they're doing. It would be rude not to maybe invite them to your table or whatever, like if we're at a casual bar. Whereas in Denmark, the thinking is the opposite. The thinking is, well, they must want to be alone. They must want their privacy, and therefore it's rude to intrude on their privacy. And so everyone thinks this way. And then it becomes kind of like, Danes do not know how to approach a stranger. And so when it comes to the dating scene, like the guys do not know how to talk to a girl. And so they end up just, both the girls and the guys, they both get like drunk so that they can start to talk to each other. And I was talking to like some of the girls in Denmark, and they say there's a magic window. There's like a magic window where the guys are drunk enough to approach you, but not so drunk that they're like total idiots, and then you don't want to be like anywhere near them. And so it's about an hour at about 11 o'clock at night. And then, if you're a girl that doesn't want an idiot, then you just walk home at 12 if if you didn't meet the right person. So the Danes use alcohol a lot to kind of as a social lubricant, and then they end up drinking more than we do. I'm not saying that, like, yeah. So the teenagers, you'll see around this time of year, you'll see like a lot of the teenagers are graduating from the high school or their equivalent of high school. And yeah, you'll see like crowds of like 50 teenagers completely wasted. And I think in Canada, if you saw that, people would be calling the police and, break up the party, they're noisy. But in Denmark, the community hires security guards who are there just to watch them, to make sure, like, if anything happens, there's somebody sober and responsible to, deal with the situation. And so they kind of just accept the fact that teenagers are going to party and we're just going to make it safe for them. That's kind of their attitude towards partying teenagers. Yeah. So there you have it. So the parks are, some people are throwing sticks at each other, some people are getting wasted. Yeah.
And occasionally there's some cosplay going on, because we walked home one night when I was visiting Mike, and there was a cow and a moose sitting together on a bench drinking beer.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is another thing about, like, if the Danes don't talk to each other, you can be in your own little bubble with your own, like, whatever. I don't want to call it weird, because if that's what you like, that's what you like, right? But if you're a little bit outside the normal, right? So you get people dressed up in really weird and wild outfits, and everyone's just going to treat you normal because, that's their attitude. Like, okay, that's the way you want to live your life, fine, And so upon living there, like, I've learned that within Europe, Denmark was the first to make pornography legal, the first to make, homosexual relations legal. And then upon being there, you realize that they have this religious, like, not religious, but more like they have this kind of like attitude, like, it's your life, you do what you want. Like, that's kind of their approach. They don't feel like you have to fit. There's some aspects of society that you have to fit in, but in terms of your private life at home, they kind of, their attitude, that's your life. And they hold that very precious. So another thing that is kind of different about Danes compared to Canadians is you won't make friends at the office. The Danes show up to the office and they work as quickly as possible to finish all their work so they can rush home and be with their family again. So there actually isn't this kind of, like, I think in North America, there's a lot more of this chit chat friendly stuff going on at the office. And then you might go to beers at the end of the day, maybe with your colleagues. But that almost never happens in Denmark. So, yeah.
They're too polite to ask, so I'll have to.
Okay.
So which outfit did you wear in the park?
Well, if you must know, I think I was known for wearing a white t-shirt all the time, and I still just wear white t-shirts all the time. I decided to get formal, so
we're not that type of show. Derek doesn't believe that the Danes drink more than the people that came in to kick off. Jen believes that Canadians do some of those things too, which I think we're referring to the
social
having to get
lubricants.
drunk. Yeah, having to get drunk before people speak to somebody.
Yeah, like so you'll see a lot of bars in Denmark that, for example, have like organized games, and this is like, so it could be there's like one bar that's like, the game is you have a nail and a piece of wood, and it's like who can put the nail in with one swing. So the games are simple, they're not like anything complicated, but they love this kind of structured play where, like, okay, then we do this and then we do that, because then, like, the social interaction is defined. You don't have to think about it. You just follow through with the game, and maybe you work up the courage to say, hey, where are you from? Like, and so I agree that, like, we in Canada still use alcohol, but it is just at another level, the social awkwardness, I would say, when it comes to kind of dating. So the Danes love Tinder, for example, because it kind of has that distance. You don't, you can approach a person from a distance, and yeah. So.
Very now curious. The Ezra Street party that happens at the University of Waterloo, which is the big thing that happens on St. Paddy's Day.
Yeah.
Does Danish people have something that would look like that?
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah. There is a festival, they call it Distortion. And yeah, and so it's not just a street, it's an entire neighborhood that is set up with like DJ tables, you know, in all the different cul-de-sacs, and everyone just gets wasted. And yeah, and you just go from, you know, DJ to DJ and dance to techno music. And this happens on Wednesday, Thursday, and then the festival over the weekend moves into the concert hall for the people who actually paid. But it's insane when you go to this Distortion festival. I never saw girls peeing in the street until I went to this festival. They and like that's another thing that like blows my mind about they're in some things they're very private about, and then in areas where maybe we're private about, they're just like, yeah, I'll pee on the street, you know, like who cares, you know. So girls just lift up their skirts, squat, and away they go, you know. So anyways, I'm sorry, but these
There's
are
going to
just,
be some editing in this one, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm sorry, but these are all the cultural shocks that I kind of experienced along the way. Like, it's not like I sit there and I go like, yeah, check, that bucket list is done. Like, it was just like kind of like it was just kind of like, what? Because you never, like, even me, like Danish men like freely pee in public all the time. And but to me, even to like after living in Denmark for 7 years, like, you know, I go up behind a tree and make sure no one can see me, and then I pee, you know. So like I still have that Canadian kind of like privacy, I don't know, you know,
Privacy. Yeah.
discretion, you know, like being discreet about stuff, right? So yeah,
That's a little bit of a European thing, though. I mean, Jackie and I were in Paris.
yeah,
And the first time we were out for a walk at 9 o'clock, 9:30, just as it's getting dark, and this drunk guy's staggering down the street. So we stopped to window shop to let him go by, just ignore it. And next thing I know, he's standing beside me like this, relieving himself on the window.
yeah. If you go home in the middle of the night in Copenhagen, you see this too, and it's everywhere. So yeah, but yeah, so they're pretty relaxed around, you know, going out and having a few beers and partying. That it is not as controlled. You can go from bar to bar, you can carry your drink from bar to bar, you can, you know, like, and it is a lot of fun, and it was super nice. So yeah, before the kid came into my life, I was enjoying the nightlife quite a lot in Denmark. And yeah, it was fun. Like, there's a lot of good jazz bars in Denmark, and then some techno bars, and then there was just some fancy, you know, mixed drink bars. And there's also a lot of like there is a lot of like microbrew bars that sort of specialize in sort of getting rare and tasty beers and IPAs and so forth. That's actually pretty popular. I could think of about 20 of these bars, and they basically will have 20 beers on tap, and different styles, and the bartenders know their stuff, and you just ask them, hey, I like this, and they'll give it to you, and you'll be amazed. So that's really nice. And I go out to them, my friends and I go out to them about maybe once every 2 months or so. I'm seeing my friends maybe 2 times a month, if that, because it is a bit busy in my life right now. But yeah.
So when you were doing nightlife,
Yeah.
Derek's making a comment about being in Reykjavik and drinking till like 6 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
What is sort of the magic hour in Denmark?
It depends on how long you want to stay up, I would say. So you can, especially in the summertime, you will go home and it'll be daylight the next day. And the hours are a bit shorter. It's about the same latitude as Edmonton. So I don't know if you've ever lived in Edmonton, then you'll know kind of like how long the summer days are. But yeah, there is no official closing time. And I've never, only on a few occasions have I been able to close out a bar. Let's just put it that way. But most of the time I
You're
ended
getting
up
old. I used to have to throw you out at 2 o'clock. You're telling me that you've never stayed till a bar closed in Denmark.
But that's to say that's how late they stay open, right? So the bars
So you go to the bar, get drunk, go to work, sleep, do a little bit of work in the afternoon, and then go out to the bar again.
So Friday, Saturday night is when it's all crazy. This is when everything's crazy. Yeah. So the next day, like everyone's just hungover. And yeah, so the bars that are like centered around music, right? So they have like some live music, whatever. Those bars would close around 2, right? And the last set would be at like midnight or something like this, right?
Mhm.
And by the time we saw the last set, then we would want to go to another bar. And then so the cocktail bars, they'll be open till about 3, 4 a.m. And then the dance bars, you know, basically they'll stay open until the last guy decides to go home. Like, yeah. So there is no limit to how much you want to party. And there's also a lot of like kind of like organized like parties, like public parties where they'll like basically like make an agreement with the city. There's a lot of like old industrial areas, there's a lot of beach areas, there's a lot of like kind of places where people don't live, and you could just make an agreement with the city and say, hey, I'm having a party here, and then, you know, be it DJ music, whatever, concert, and it'll be public, and you know, and then yeah, so there's a lot of this sort of stuff happening too. So I would say like when I was in my my more going out every weekend kind of phase, there would be like one of these sort of like events like once a month, and they're a lot of fun, you know, like, so yeah.
So Jackie and I came to visit. We're going to get to that one in a second.
Okay. Maybe I'll just
2016. Well, don't go. We're going to get that one in a second.
okay.
Oh, he's in a hurry. Ladies and gentlemen, the only other, we actually do have the IPA number 21. We are going to try that next.
There's 2 versions of a second. There's like 5 minutes as a second. Or...
No, we're just going to pour the beer now because you need a beer. So Jackie and I, when we were over to visit you,
yeah,
went to the papery, which is where the it doesn't exist anymore.
No, well, something like it exists. So
yeah, but it was where the newspaper kept all of its newsprint.
Yeah,
and when they stopped doing that, they converted it into a pop-up food and party area.
So street food. They had all these like street food.
Yeah, and its agreement with the city was to close at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
What I remember most about that was despite the fact that everybody that was out there when Jackie and I were walking around at 2 o'clock in the morning were totally trashed. Nobody was giving anyone a hassle who was like cleaning up or taking stuff away and making them move on and leave.
Yeah.
So in Toronto, where we are right now, if you were to try something like that down on the beaches where you were putting deck chairs away, you'd probably end up with an argument with every drunk person.
Yeah.
So the Danes don't have this habit of confrontation when they're drunk.
No, people are pretty chill. Yeah.
Why is that?
I think I don't know, to be honest with you. My speculation would be like Danes don't like conflict to begin with, right? Yeah. And I think I also
that's why they celebrate their Viking heritage.
Yeah. Yeah. Like so they've changed obviously. So but I think like yeah, so they don't like conflict. And I just think that
they don't have a culture of it.
Yeah.
It's actually socially unacceptable to be confrontational.
Yeah.
Even when you're drunk.
Yeah. So you would never like challenge somebody. That would rarely happen. I will say there is a bit of a football hooligan thing that happens though. Around the football matches, you will get like really drunk, like yelling and screaming and throwing bottles around.
Celebratory because their team won, and going out
Um,
and getting more drunk because your team lost.
yeah, so there's a big rivalry. There's the Copenhagen Football Club, Brøndby Football Club, and Brøndby is like a train ride. It's the next town over, and that's when, like, I used to live downtown, and it was like one of these matches, and there was just a huge group of dudes. Just like, I never saw any stuff happening, but they were definitely like lighting off fireworks and throwing bottles, and there is an element of society that likes to get rowdy, and this would be the and so I saw it with the football hooligans, but I don't think it's anywhere near like what you hear about with like the English fans. So
Or the German fans, or the French fans,
yeah,
or the Scottish fans.
so it's like I've only seen it a few times where you get this kind of element. I'll tell you, there is also you will also see it around New Year's Eve. So the Danes they also are very relaxed around fireworks, but you can only use fireworks around New Year's Eve, and they buy a shit ton of fireworks, and just everyday people buy fireworks, a huge box of fireworks. And so as soon as 12 o'clock hits, and then for an hour, everyone's just lighting off like basically what is like $100 worth of fireworks. And some people go crazy and buy like $500 worth of fireworks. And the city is just lit up and noisy as hell, and everyone's screaming and everything like that. But it's known that the area around City Hall, a whole bunch of hooligans show up and they start shooting the fireworks at each other. And everyone knows this. So
They're North Americans, okay.
But everyone knows this, and so only the hooligans show up to this one part of town, right? So like it's kind of like, okay, fine, you showed up, you knew what you were getting into, and so they are starting to try to crack down on the fireworks, because there has been stories where maybe like an ambulance was trying to get through, but people were lighting off too many fireworks on the street. So there has been stories where people kind of maybe took it too far, but I think that's like anything, right? So yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
They let themselves loose the very first hour of a new year, and then they go back to being repressed.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Just so we're clear on that.
Yeah.
Thomas is curious, are there such a thing as like a 24-hour club or a 24-hour bar?
Not that I know of. Yeah.
There is that secret society over there that lives outside the government. Is it still around? It's not a secret society, it's well open.
Yeah. So there's this like
Christiana.
Yeah, Christiana. Yeah, exactly. So there was this like group of hippies. There was this old Navy base that was basically not being used for anything. And there was a bunch of hippies who didn't want to be kind of part of society. And they basically started squatting in all these old Navy buildings that were dilapidated. And and the Danish government kind of tolerated it until it basically became its own thing. And they deal weed there. So it's like marijuana is not legal in Denmark. So the fact that they have something called Pusher Street, and it's about a lane, maybe 100 feet, 300 feet, I don't know. And there's basically stalls.
It's never been there. That's what you're trying to publicly
Of course
say.
I've been there. It's a tourist attraction.
And that's the only place I can buy my weed. Yeah.
I don't think so. When I smoke weed, I just fall asleep. So for me, marijuana is not like a fun drug. But anyways, that's just me. But anyways, but yeah, so yeah, and so they're dealing marijuana like openly in this like street, and they have all these stands and these guys wearing shades and like, and then they have like security. So like the street is here, but then there's like this security perimeter, so that if anybody who they think is a police officer, these people out here can, ring the alarm, and then these people just like clean up shop like this, so they have a system down to kind of basically like, and sometimes there are raids, and sometimes, I think like one thing in law enforcement that I've learned is like they will let some illegal activity happen because then they know where it is. You know what I'm sort of saying? And it's better to kind of let a little bit where they know where it is and they know who the people are, and they, and they can kind of like monitor it. So like all the really nasty stuff that comes from, so the one thing about Christiana is they're very, so they're relaxed about marijuana, but they're very strict about other drugs. So I think they've learned that if they just stick to weed, nobody bothers them. Yeah. So yeah. So yeah, so there is these elements of kind of counterculture. But the funny thing about Christiana, like even though it's like a bunch of squatters in dilapidated like Navy buildings, like anything, it's become gentrified, and it's like super expensive and super difficult to get housing in this area. So it still retains some of this like rebel spirit, but like all the different boroughs in Copenhagen that have had any kind of edge, there is this drift towards gentrification, I'm afraid. So, but I think that's everywhere. So
Copenhagen's got, Denmark's got an excellent urban transportation system. The train goes everywhere.
Yeah.
You can buy a one-day pass, or as you gave us, you ticket that you load up and you just use it every time.
Yeah.
Mine just quit. Sorry. Bikes everywhere. Oh yes, yeah. You had to learn how to make sure that before you stepped off a sidewalk, check to make sure that bikes aren't coming, because they have the right of way over everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So all the roads, they have a sidewalk, bike lane, and then the road cars. And sometimes it's, between the bike lane and the car lane, there's like a dedicated bus lane. So that's one thing that the Danes do with their urban planning, is they make driving the car is like the second class citizen.
Yeah, there's like a $10,000 surcharge when you buy a vehicle and bring it into the country.
Yeah. So the tax for buying a car is like something like 100 and something %. So you have to, you buy the car for 20,000 Canadian dollars, and then you give the government 30,000 on top of that, for the tax. And so you only buy a car if you have a really good reason to own a car. But the flip side of it is their transit system is excellent. They basically make it so, there's very little, for a lot of people, there's very little reason to own a car. And in the city, the best way to get around is by bike. It's flat, that's one thing, but also the infrastructure for biking is excellent. And and so it just becomes the easier way to get around. Like you can get places faster on a bike than by car. And of course they do what every other city does. They make everything one way and super complicated to get anywhere. So with a bike, none of those traffic rules apply to you, and then you can just go straight. And
So what type of a bike do you have to move Victor around?
Yeah, this is another fun thing. So they have something called a Christiana bike, and it's essentially like a tricycle, and instead of the like 2 wheels at the back and a wheel at the front, it's the other way around. You got 1 wheel at the back and then 2 wheels at the front, and then between the 2 wheels at the front is this huge bucket, and they're cool bikes, and this blew my mind the first 2 weeks that I was there. In Canada, like everyone drives around with these like pickup trucks, and like half the people don't really use a pickup truck for what a pickup truck is for. But if you wanted to move your furniture, you'd call the guy with the pickup truck. I've seen people move a couch. I've seen people move a refrigerator. I've seen like a family of 4 with like, a week's worth of groceries like piled into these like Christiana bikes. So that's like basically the pickup truck for Denmark are these like cargo bikes. I own one. They're great. Victor loves riding in these cargo bikes, and yeah, it basically opens up the city for us as a family, because anywhere in the city, any playground, you know, I want to take him to the zoo, I want to take him to the aquarium, you know, I can just get into the cargo bike and go, and we're there. I have an electric one, so like I don't have to, like, the weight of the family, you know, doesn't really apply. And yeah, it's flat, and so then we just go. So
Maggie saw them
mhm.
and informed me that that's exactly how she wants me to pedal her around on the East Coast. So yes, there will be one, and it will be electric, because I am not pedaling up that 780-foot hill.
Yeah, so I'm a mule too, by the way. So like I tried to say to my wife, like, oh, maybe you should bring your own bike. And she's like, nope, you're pedaling me.
Yeah, that was actually the first thing that Jackie saw, was the guy pedaling the bike and the mother and the 3 kids sitting in the cargo part.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So my sister came to visit me, and
You had to bike her around, didn't you?
well, it was just easier, right? Because she could have rented a bike, and then I'd have to be like telling her, no, turn left here, turn right here. So I just said, just get in the bike, and I'll show you around. And my sister was embarrassed because like I took a week off and I was touring her around on Monday, and she didn't see any family in these Christiana bikes at all, because everyone's commuting, right? They're just going to work. And of course you don't go to work with your family. So she didn't see anybody. So here I am pedaling her around, you know.
Jackie in the background
Yeah.
just joined us.
Yeah. So I'm pedaling my sister around, and she's just like, I'm the only one in a Christiana bike. What's going on here? And I'm like, Kim, I'll ask Dane if this is normal. And she's like, no, I'm embarrassed, you know. And she asked me enough times, and a very quintessential like Danish response. So I turn around behind me. There's a Dane lady driving a Christiana bike by herself, and I'm like, hey, you know, would you like would you ride somebody in the bucket with you? Like, do you do this? She goes, yeah, I do this with my wife all the time. And so then my sister was like, oh, okay, it's normal. But like, that's the other thing that was sort of like quintessentially Danish, like people just being open with what their lifestyle is because it's accepted, you know? So, yeah.
Carrie, I'm curious, if you ever came back to Canada, would you bring your cargo bike with you?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think they're really cool. And I think I was neighbors with a New Zealand couple, and they were only in Copenhagen for like a year. And I wanted to buy their cargo bike thinking they wouldn't take it to New Zealand. They were like, no way, I'm definitely taking this back to New Zealand. Because it is super, like if you have a family, like it's way easier to throw the kid in the cargo bike and you know, like instead of strapping him into a car seat and blah blah blah. And you know when you're just going for groceries, or you're going for like to the park, you know, the distance is perfect for a bike. It's just, yeah, it's great. So yeah.
What is your favorite area of Copenhagen?
Yeah, that's a good question. They all have their own character, I would say. So there is sort of like these boroughs, so to speak. I can't say that there's like one that's like my favorite. Like it depends on kind of what mood I'm in. The center of the city has a mix of this like super old buildings that are just like really cool. Like I lived in a building where nothing was straight, nothing was square, because it was kind of like made by builders back before they had like precision
That looks square.
construction. Yeah, exactly. Nothing, like everything was like wonky. And it's just so cool. There's like a charm to this kind of like wonky. And this building's been there for 500 years, you know, so like like of course it's sturdy, right? But it's just charming to sort of see like, okay, you could imagine this building being built in this like horse and buggy era, like, you know, when everything was an agrarian society. And then next to it is this like opulent, like, you know, Renaissance, Baroque, whatever, you know, when the king wanted to show off how rich and powerful he is, church, you know what I'm saying? So like, so that's the city center. That's just, so it's charming. And the city center is actually kind of cool. I used to live there, so that's why I can talk about the city center. But they have these like secret tunnels and secret passages everywhere. And like I ended up like, I think finding or discovering like most of them, because back in the old days, like they didn't have cars. They had like, everyone just walked around, and then they just had like all these like secret tunnels everywhere to help people get around. So the city's charming in that regard. And then you go out from there, and there's basically like five neighborhoods kind of around it, right? And then, so the first area I lived in when I was in Copenhagen was the borough like called Nørrebro. And that is traditionally, that would be the area where sort of the immigrants would live. So there would be a lot more ethnic kind of population there, a mix of everybody kind of thing. Mostly people from the Middle East, but others as well. And that was where when I first showed up, that's actually where I felt most comfortable, because it kind of reminded me of Toronto, like a mix of people from everywhere. And so that's where I ended up living at first. And then, yeah, I moved around lots. And then from this, so that's Normal, and then they got Vestibule, which is, it's not so much like this anymore, but this would be basically the red light district for Copenhagen. Because like most things have moved online, so you don't really see it much anymore. There's a few strip clubs and a few like sex shops, but it's basically turned into just a big party district. There's a lot of like bars and nightclubs in this area, and it's pretty edgy, so you can, you know, get away with a bit more. And then they got Amager, and they called Amager is a man-made island essentially, and it's basically made with landfill. So they call it Trash Island. And so most Danes thinks it's like, you know, it's a lower class neighborhood, but I actually thought it was really cool out there, because they actually got a lot of like, they got some nice beaches out there. And so it's just a great place just to hang out with your friends on a summer day. So that's Amager. And then you have Østerbro, which is where I live now. And this is basically the family friendly area of Denmark. So they got huge parks in Østerbro, really nice houses. I would say 2 out of 3 Danish prime ministers live in Østerbro. That's kind of like the type of place it is. I live on the edge next to Nørrebro. So like, I'm kind of just in Østerbro. So that's like.
Is that because you're not Danish?
Yeah, so that's actually kind of what part of the criteria for me was, that like a neighborhood that didn't mind somebody who struggled with Danish, because min dansk er ikke så godt. So anyways, there you go, I even said it wrong, but my Danish is not so good. So like 3 or 4 sentences into a Danish conversation and I get lost. So I need like Danes who are patient with me. Anyway, so this neighborhood that I'm at, there's a lot of this kind of like, you know, non-Dane marrying a Dane. There's a lot of these kind of families in this neighborhood, and so then I feel kind of more comfortable in this neighborhood. Yeah.
Go ahead and tell us which one you liked. I'm just kidding.
I think
what was the hardest cultural thing to overcome when you first went to Denmark?
I can only pick one. No.
You can describe it whatever way you want.
Yeah, I think Danes, it is a closed society. And I think that's in Canada, we're very much more open. It's much easier to like talk to strangers. It's much easier to sort of make friends. And so in the expat community, it's like first year university all over again. Like everyone's just rushing out to meet friends and everything like that. So that part is like super easy. But the other thing about the expat community is like easy come, easy go, right? So, you know, you go through lots of waves where okay, now I have a group of friends, and then 6 months later it disintegrates. And now I have a group of friends, and then 6 months later it disintegrates. So I would say that was probably and then the Danes are super hard to break into. Like they kind of and this is another thing that about Danes that is sort of different is once you make friends with a Dane, you're always their friend. And they will always sort of make a point of making sure they see you like a few times a year. And so they have their high school friends, they have their university friends, and then their calendar is full for the rest of their life. So it's not so much that they're like, don't like you. It's just that they already have their friends and they're already busy. They don't have time to see you, right? And so if you make friends with a Dane, like that's special because they're like kind of like deciding that they're just going to see their one high school friend like that much less, you know. So it is hard to kind of break in, but I ended up having a hybrid group of friends now. Some of them are Danes and some of them are, but most of them are essentially foreigners who have decided to stay in Denmark. And so like half of us have kids now. And so now we're like stuck in Denmark. And so now I'm not so worried about my like friend group kind of disintegrating every 6 months, but it took a good 2 or 3 years to kind of get to that point. Yeah, so that would probably be the hardest thing, I guess. And the first thing that hits you, by the way, actually, if we're going to talk about hard things, every foreigner has a story about the housing market is crazy, and things. This is another thing that is sort of like things are a little not as transparent as what it would be in Toronto or Vancouver in terms of the housing market. You kind of have to know somebody is sort of the way it works here. So of course, when you first show up, you don't know anybody. And so the people who are advertising housing like openly, there's a lot of honest people, but generally they're trying to take advantage of foreigners. So they're generally trying to charge more and they're generally trying to like even scam you. And so almost every foreigner has a story of being scammed. So the very first difficult thing is finding housing. Once you find housing, then it's finding friends. And then once you have those two things, life gets pretty easy. Yeah, that's how I would say it. Yeah.
So what's a typical day look like for Mike?
Right now, it's not exciting, I'm afraid. My typical day, I think, is the typical day for any parent who is in the middle of raising toddler. I don't know when my son wakes up, but he'll generally be the one that wakes me up. And yeah, right now he's waking up at 4:30 in the morning, and lovely, and he needs constant attention. So yeah, and the rest of the city doesn't wake up until like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. So then we have to kind of entertain him for 3 hours somehow, and then we go out and do stuff. My job is the type of job where I can mostly work from home. So kind of 2 or 3 times a week, I will work from home. Otherwise, I drive to work. I take the kid to the daycare and then I drive to work and then come home, have dinner, hang out with the kid. I usually take him outside and play in the front yard or something like that. So yeah, right now it's kind of, yeah, fatherhood for you. Yeah.
Your specialty used to be wind turbine blades. That's changed.
Yeah, well, I still do wind turbine blades, but I work at a university. I'm a researcher. So research is all about creating new knowledge. So if you keep on working on the same problem, either you're just really bad at it or it's a really tough problem. And yeah, and blades, I'm afraid, is not that tough. So we're running out of new ideas to do with wind turbines. The things that, there are still things to be done, but the improvement is just getting smaller and smaller and smaller from doing further and further research. So the amount of funding that is sort of available just to do like blade research is sort of drying up because the funding agencies know this, and more it's kind of the industry companies that are just sort of doing the research themselves at this stage. So what I've been really trying to move towards is a type of wind energy which is based on kites, which you'll probably, if you were to Google it, you would probably say like airborne wind energy. And so with traditional wind turbines, you have the pretty heavy foundation, pretty heavy tower, you know, and then you have your wind turbine rotor, and like it's generating a huge amount of forces. So this tower and this foundation end up becoming like more than half the cost of your wind turbine. And the idea behind airborne wind energy is, you know, we could take the blade and then we can just operate the blade like an airplane, right? And so some of the lift force that we use for flying around pushes against the wind so we can generate electricity, but then part of the lift force we use to kind of keep it up in the air. And by doing that, then we don't need the tower and we don't need the foundation anymore. And so in theory, you know, we could maybe make wind energy half as expensive. And the nice thing about airborne wind energy is that you can actually fly it higher in the atmosphere. And so there are limits to how, like, the challenge with renewable energy is renewable energy has a tendency to cannibalize itself. So it's sort of like, you know, the first wind turbine, great, they make lots of money with it, but as soon as you start adding more and more wind turbines to the electricity grid, all the wind turbines turn on at the same time, and you start getting this situation where the electricity price just kind of collapses whenever like the conditions are good for wind or solar or whatever, right? And so the golden, like what we want to do, us researchers in renewable energy, is to try to find technologies that can kind of fill the gaps. And airborne is not perfect for this because it still relies on the wind, but in theory, they can operate at lower winds, right? And so the idea would then be to sort of have a power plant that is a mix of traditional wind turbines, and then in the cases where the wind is not strong enough for the traditional wind turbines, then you could use these airborne wind turbines. And then basically with the same electrical infrastructure, you can maybe get a more broad kind of generating profile. And so that's, so to me, that's sort of exciting because, you know, it's technology that's not yet there, not yet proven. So there's a big open field of research to be done. And if we can manage to do a good job of it, we can, you know, add another renewable energy to the mix to help make a green electricity grid. So yeah, so that's kind of where I'm going now. It's pretty tough to get funding. So, you know, we're working on a shoestring budget for this work. And hopefully we put out some good results and maybe more money comes in. That's kind of what I'm working on.
Yeah, you bring a whole new meeting to go fly a kite.
Yeah, exactly.
Mike, go fly a kite.
Okay, please let me.
Thank you for taking time out of your vacation
Yep.
to share your story with all of us here at the Kickoff Annex.
Yeah.
You know, appreciate it, Mike. Thank
Yeah.
you very much. Everybody, next week, live at Reverence Brewing. Hope to see you there.
Great. Thank you, everyone. See you.
That was fascinating.